Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Can you hear me? Thumbs up if you can hear me. Great. Well, good morning. My name is David Trulio, and it is my privilege to be the president and CEO of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. As we start the program today, I did want to recognize some members of the audience. We'll start with our trustees from the Reagan Foundation's Board of Trustees, Michael Castine, Ben Sutton, and Pete Wilson and his wife, Gail. How about a round of applause for our trustees? And from the Reagan family, President Reagan's granddaughter, Ashley Reagan Dunster, and her husband, Joe Dunster. And also from the Reagan family, we are pleased to have Dennis Revelle, husband of the late Maureen Reagan. We have former congressman from this very district, Elton Gallegly, and his wife, Janice. And we also have with us today Dr. Jeremy Moreland, president of William Woods University. Now, for their generosity in connection with our events this week, special thanks to Ashley Parker Snyder from Fess Parker Wineries, Dan Hill from Mach 1 Air Charters, and Anthony Angelini from the Simi Valley Chamber Tourism Alliance. Let's give a hand to our sponsors. Now, extra special thanks and gratitude for the distinct honor to have 4 World War II veterans and their families with us here today. Now, please hold your applause. All right, let's all just stand and honor them. Now I'm going to share their names, and then we're going to do that all over again. So, Charles Chuck Ullman, Merchant Marines Communications Officer; Elmer Bud Lewis, Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Marines; Earl Thomas Gentry, Seaman First Class, U.S. Navy, and Storekeeper Third Class, U.S. Air Force; and Irving Weiss, Radio Man Second Class, U.S. Navy. All right, everybody, let's stand up and give them a hand. It is truly wonderful that you are here with us today on this momentous day. Thank you. Now, we are also very grateful to have with us the daughter of the late Private First Class Peter Robert Zanatta of the 37th Engineer Combat Battalion. Now, PFC Zanatta was part of the first assault wave on Omaha Beach. So just think of that, 80 years ago today. His daughter, Lisa Zanatta Henn, wrote President Reagan about her father's experiences on D-Day, and President Reagan quoted her letter so eloquently 40 years ago today. Lisa was with President Reagan in Normandy 40 years ago today, and we are so grateful that she is here with us today here at the Reagan Library. So let's give a hand to Lisa. I would simply add, I would encourage everybody to watch or listen to President Reagan's speech at the Omaha Beach Memorial, and it's just so incredibly powerful, and he quotes rather deeply from the letter that Lisa wrote, and it's just extremely powerful. Now, it is my honor to introduce Mr. Fred Ryan, the chairman of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. Now, Fred has served the President and Mrs. Reagan since 1980, in roles including Director of Presidential Appointments and Scheduling in the White House, and as President Reagan's first post-presidency Chief of Staff. Today, in addition to being our board chairman, Fred heads our Center on Civility and Democracy, which support Ronald Reagan's vision of fostering informed patriotism, where Americans can disagree about issues without villainizing each other and can find common ground and trust in our democratic institutions. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Fred Ryan.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you. Well, thank you, Dave. Good morning, everyone. President Reagan began his tribute by saying, quote, "We're here to mark that day in history when the Allied armies joined in battle to reclaim this continent to liberty. For 4 long years, much of Europe had been under a terrible shadow. Free nations had fallen. Jews cried out in the camps. Millions cried out for liberation. Europe was enslaved, and the world prayed for its rescue. Here in Normandy, the rescue began. Here, the Allies stood and fought against tyranny in a giant undertaking unparalleled in human history." Those were the words spoken 40 years ago today by our 40th president as he commemorated the 40th anniversary of D-Day, as he honored the soldiers who led that fight, what he called the boys of Pointe du Hoc, the men who took the cliffs, the champions who helped free a continent, and the heroes who helped end a war. We're honored to have you with us today here at the Reagan Presidential Library as we look back 80 years at one of the most consequential moments of the 20th century, which President Reagan marked so brilliantly in Normandy, France in June of 1984. Today is about honoring our past and celebrating the courage of the men who took the cliffs. From their courage, we draw inspiration and a reminder that in the words of President Reagan, democracy is worth dying for because it's the most deeply honorable form of government ever devised by man. Today is also about looking forward. What threats to democracy loom in our time? Does our nation have the strength to keep the peace? Would we have the national courage today to take the cliffs? What warnings should we heed? Not just from President Reagan's words that day, but also from his 8 years as our commander-in-chief. With us today are Reagan officials who were there in France 40 years ago. And with us are veterans who know what it is to risk one's life for our country. And with us are family members of those heroes of D-Day. We're grateful that all of them and that all of you have chosen to join us for this special program. So to begin the program, please stand for the presentation of the colors by the Naval Base of Ventura County, followed by the National Anthem sung by Voices of Service, and the invocation by Commander Song Wang of the U.S. Naval Chaplain Corps.
Can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming? And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave
Please join me in prayer. Our gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for your unwavering faithfulness throughout history, guiding the hands of warriors in their fight for freedom and justice. Today we gather to remember and honor the brave men and women of the D-Day invasion. Lord, as we reflect on their courage and sacrifice, grant us wisdom from their courage and the strength to uphold the values they fought to protect. We are reminded of the countless prayers that rose up to you in those dark days of war. As we commemorate the bravery and sacrifice of those who fought on the shores of Normandy, the words spoken by President Ronald Reagan in his D-Day speech come to mind. We will always remember, we will always be proud, we will always be prepared, so we may always be free. Lord, may these words echo in our hearts today and always. Bless those who sacrifice their lives, exemplifying the greatest love. Fill our hearts with gratitude for our freedoms and guide us to honor their legacy. Bestow upon us peace to heal our hearts, especially those grieving the loss of their loved ones, and guide our steps. May your blessings continue to be upon our veterans and their families, both present and past. And may your divine blessings be upon the United States of America. We pray this in your holy name. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for a wreath laying at the Gold Star Memorial Monument, which includes our World War II veterans. Merchant Marines Communications Officer, Charles Chuck Ullman. Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Marines, Elmer Bud Lewis. Seaman First Class, U.S. Navy, and Storekeeper Third Class, U.S. Air Force, Earl Thomas Gentry. And Radioman Second Class, U.S. Navy, Irving Weiss.
States Coast Guard.
We're always ready for the call. We place our trust in thee. Through surf and storm and howling gale, I shall our purpose be. Commemorates is our guide, our fame and glory too. To fight, to save or fight and die, I Coast Guard, we are for you.
The United States Space Force.
We're the mighty lost to lie, guardians beyond the blue, the invisible front line. We're fighters brave and true, only reaching into space. There's no limit to our sky, standing guard both night and day. We're the Space Force from on high.
The United States Air Force.
Off we go into the wild blue yonder, climbing high into the sun. Here they come, zooming to meet our thunder. Attaboy, give him the gun, give him the gun! Down we die, starting a flame of thunder. Off we gone, tell them a roar. We live in fame, we're down and say, hey, nothing can stop the U.S. Air Force.
The United States Navy.
Anchors away, my boys, anchors away. Farewell to foreign shores, we sail at break of day. Through our last night on shore, drink to the full, until we meet once more. Here's wishing you a happy voyage home.
The United States Marine Corps.
From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we will fight our country's battles in the air, on land and sea. First to fight for right and freedom, and to keep our honor clean. We are proud to claim the title of United States Marine.
The United States Army.
March along, sing a song. We're the army of the free. Count the brave, count the true, moving forward to victory. We're the army and proud of
5 years ago, my son, Trey, who's here with me today, and I were wandering around in awe with a small detail from Robins Air Force Base at Pointe du Hoc and on Omaha Beach. It gives even more meaning to this incredibly glorious day that we share together in the greatest and freest country in the history of humankind. I'm honored this morning to introduce our first program and start by reminding you that on June 6, 1984, President Reagan delivered not one but two speeches that day. There's the Pointe du Hoc speech that is so famous, but then there were also the remarks at Omaha Beach. There, he honored those who fought, those who died, and those who returned. I'd like to read a few of the president's words. Some who survived the Battle of June 6, 1944 are here today. Others who hope to return never did. Someday, Liz, I'll go back, said Private First Class Peter Robert Zanatta of the 37th Engineer Combat Battalion and 1st Assault Wave to hit Omaha Beach. I'll go back and I'll see it all again. I'll see the beach, the barricades, the graves. The president continued, those words of Private Zanatta come to us from his daughter, Lisa Zanatta Henn, in a heart-rending story about the event her father spoke of so often. Ladies and gentlemen, Lisa Zanatta Henn was there that day in 1984, keeping a promise she made to her father, and she's with us here today at the Reagan Library. Lisa and family, welcome. Lisa will actually join us on our next panel, along with Jim Kuhn, assistant to the president in the Reagan White House, who was also in Normandy in June of 1984. We also welcome Cameron Toor, a recent veteran of the U.S. Army's elite 75th Ranger Regiment. Cameron can help us understand what it means to be an Army Ranger. And to moderate this conversation on the history of D-Day, we could ask for no one better than presidential historian, best-selling author, and Rice University professor Douglas Brinkley. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome Lisa, Jim, Cameron, and Doug. Thank you.
What a remarkable 2 days this has been here at the Reagan Library, and I want to thank Fred Ryan and everybody else here, my friend Joanne Drake. We can't go on forever, but it's been incredible and very moving with all the fine touches. And today we're doing, as you all know, more of a focus on D-Day than the life of Ronald Reagan, but the fact that these two major factors in world history, Reagan and D-Day, are intertwined forever, is something to be honored time and time again. And so I'm going to begin today. I thought we'd, in our conversation, get Lisa Zanatta Henn, who became friends. I was working on a book called The Boys of Pointe du Hoc. And when I found your letters and your stories, at the time, how all this evolved, she was working for United Airlines, and her father lived in Idaho. Would tell stories about D-Day. They ended up, Italian background, but she had such a love and admiration for her father, and that's what came across. Tell us about your growing up with your dad. How often did he reflect on being there at Normandy, and how your journey to writing that amazing letter to President Reagan that is in the program booklet, if anybody wants to read it.
I think it was like a Friday night thing after a week of work, and he would come home, and he had half days on Fridays. So it would start with, he would be making the gravy, that's what we called it, the sauce, the spaghetti sauce. And then dinner, and then always after dinner, he'd have like a glass of wine, and my brothers and I would just listen intently, and it started with funny stories of him growing up, but it always ended with D-Day, always. And some of the stories were like funny. I mean, he, sliding down a banister in Belgium, and my brothers and I would laugh and think, hey, our dad was doing that in Europe during the war, until I got older and realized what D-Day really was. And he would tell us the stories of, like in my story, about how he was on the boat waiting to land and how scared he was. He was 19 years old. And to me, 19, you're having children of my own, you're a baby, and you're facing all that. And then his dream he always said, I want to go back, I want to walk along the beach, I want to put flowers on the graves where my guys are. It was just always talked about. And he and my mom were planning that, and then my dad got sick and ended up passing away in 1976. So fast forward a few years, I'd gotten married. I'm sitting thinking, oh my God, my children will never know what a hero he was, what he did, what he fought for, what he believed in. So I just sat down and I wrote the story, and it just was like, I don't know, if he was on one shoulder and God on the other, it just came out. And then when they started publicizing it being the 40th memorial of D-Day, that they were all gonna be there because they were in their 60s, these veterans, and they would all be able to travel. And there's these 7 heads of state and all stuff. So I said, well, I'm just gonna send my story to the president. I'm just gonna send him a letter, and I sent my letter. I sent a cover letter, my story, my dad's, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
That's where you just randomly dropped
Remember,
in?
no internet, no cell phones, no, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. That's what we used to write letters to the president when you were in school. So okay. So I sent it with the discharge, my dad's discharge papers, a telegram I think my nanny had gotten that my dad had been injured on June 6th, and I just sent the whole packet. And it was a big joke in our family, like, have you heard from the president? Are we gonna go on Air Force One? And then all of a sudden, my mom, because I still work for United, but I was based in Chicago at the time. And so I gave them my mom's address and phone number as a contact, because I didn't know, I was commuting from San Francisco to Chicago, I didn't know where I'd be. And then when my mom is in the office, her office, and someone comes in and says, Peggy, the White House is on the phone? And being from San Francisco, my mom thought it was the White House department store until she got on the phone. And then, that night I called her from O'Hare Airport. I was on my way home. And like I said, no cell phones, big bank of phones. And I'm talking, and she said, and she's crying on the phone. And I'm like, Mom, what's wrong? What's wrong? She goes, the president wants to meet you. And I remember looking at the phone going, the president of the United States wants to meet me? And all the people on the phone banks turned and looked at me. And I'm like, so it just started from that. And then it kept escalating. And it was truly one of the greatest moments. And he was the kindest, sweetest man. And my mother could, when we finally were in Normandy and it all happened, my mom could barely speak. And she was so emotional. It was so comforting. And I remember he turned to my brother, who is really big, and he had on his Secret Service glasses. And he turned to him and said, I could use a guy like you. It was just so personable. It was just lovely.
Had your family been Reaganites or Reagan people?
I think, when he was governor of California, yeah, I think, but not really. But we sure turned. But he was just, I can't even begin to tell you how, when you think as a young child, or even, as 28, you think, this is the president of the United States. He's gonna be this big, strong political person. And he wasn't like that at all. He was so sweet and so kind and just so comforting. And I'm just so thankful that he was in office to read this story or my letter from my heart, because he truly understood the value of a veteran and what they sacrificed to give.
And James Kuhn here was assistant to the president, and he had traveled went to Italy, right, with Rome in 82. Now it's 1984, and we should all maybe remind everybody, 1984, not that long after the Vietnam War, so the Vietnam veterans were getting booed and hissed, not all, but often. And so this was Ronald Reagan not just making D-Day a stake in the ground for American optimism, can-doism, exceptionalism, military excellence, winning of the Cold War, honoring World War II, all of that there. It was a way to tell all veterans, thank you for your service. And out of those speeches we've talked about, Peggy Noonan's Pointe du Hoc and Tony Dolan's Omaha Beach and Reagan's presentation, now people all over the country started standing up. Teachers would say, do we have a war veteran, somebody who did service, please stand up. And it really did start a new kind of respect to our veterans. So, Mr. Kuhn, you went then you work with Mike Deaver and you were doing advanced work. Tell us of how the decision to go to Normandy in 1984 began, and tell us about your travels to set it all up.
You'd mentioned 1982. That was the President and Mrs. Reagan's first trip to, as President and First Lady, obviously, to Europe. And it was after that the dialogue already had started in the White House about going to Normandy in 84 and how important it was going to be and how meaningful. And it just fits so well with Ronald Reagan, because he understood. He always had the big picture in mind that if you want a strong national economy, you have to have a strong national defense. And if you want a strong national defense, you have to take care of America's veterans. So the planning began, as I said, the discussions about what 84 would entail. And Mike Deaver, you had Jim Baker and Ed Meese and Mike Deaver. And Mike oversaw all the travel. He made he presented everything to the President and Mrs. Reagan. And for the 40th anniversary of D-Day, yes, we knew we were going to Omaha Beach. And the Allied leaders, it was already decided were going to be for a ceremony at Utah Beach, but Deaver understood that this had to go beyond that there would be a third venue, a third stop, a third battlefield where Reagan would speak that day. And there was a lot of discussion that went into Pointe du Hoc. Do we go there? Do we not? At the highest levels, at the White House, the National Security Council, State Department, our embassy in Paris, is Pointe du Hoc the fitting place? And it was decided that it was. And that was after our survey trip 4 months ahead of time over there. And once those decisions are made, assignments are made, and I drew the lead advance for Normandy, for Pointe du Hoc, for Omaha Beach, for Utah Beach. So you go 4 months ahead of time, you go 2 months ahead of time, and then just under 3 weeks ahead of time, you set up the advance team. And we had a lot of support. We had plenty of White House staff helping us. We had our speechwriters, we had our advancement, we had our military support, Air Force One, Marine One, the embassy, the State Department. There were a lot of people involved in it. But most importantly were people like Lisa Zanatta Henn and what it came to that day and everything. And our biggest concern was weather and and what it was going to be like trying to get the President and Mrs. Reagan across the English Channel, because they'd been in Ireland making all kinds of news there. and then went into London the night before on June 5th, had dinner with Prime Minister Thatcher. And that next day, midday, we had to get 5 helicopters across the English Channel. And I think everybody knows with the weather, the ceilings, the fog, we had to have a contingency plan to bring Air Force One into Cherbourg. We had to have 2 schedules. And was it going to work? And we had 6 hours to do 3 events. And we used to say Reagan, the Irish Select always kind of prevailed when it came to the weather, because when he showed up, so many times it cleared and we had a picturesque day. Some fog came in during the speech, but it was quite a sight to see Marine One and the other 4 helicopters coming across the channel. And the last thing I'll say, Doug, here is that it was all timed for them to land at 1 o'clock in the afternoon in France. And it just so happened to be 7 o'clock on the East Coast. And all the morning news shows took it live. And so we had 6 hours of nonstop events and 2 very historic speeches. And as they say, it was because of people like Lisa and her dad, and of course, our veterans, our military, and President and Mrs. Reagan.
One word about Mike Deaver. I mean, in my field of presidential history, we talk about who are the great speechwriters, and people will talk about Ted Sorensen with Kennedy and Peggy Noonan with Reagan. But in the term stagecraft, Mike Deaver is always the one given as an example, and I noticed how astutely he did set it up for the morning shows, made sure they were running this live right in the morning. Good Morning America, there's the president, and many other things. Just briefly, but what was so special about Deaver? How did he get things done in the way that he did that we see other presidents struggle with, and he seemed to be a maestro?
Well, he knew Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan better than anybody. And he knew their thought process. He knew when to put them out on travel. And of course, it was a given they were going to be in Normandy. But a lot of presidents will go here, they'll go there, they'll go everywhere they're invited to. Deaver didn't do that. He didn't recommend that. He knew when they needed to appear and when they didn't. So he knew what Reagan himself wanted. He knew, and Nancy was very much in the middle of everything in that regard, especially as their travel went. But he knew how to put Reagan out there, when to have him appear and when not. And he was just a master at communications. He knew how to market Ronald Reagan. He just did.
Let's bring into the conversation Cameron Toor, 75th Ranger Regiment, U.S. Army, retired. Cameron, so you're once a Ranger, always a Ranger, right? But I'm wondering, being a Ranger, different decades mean different things. If you studied this period of, let's say, look at the D-Day, a Ranger on the U.S. Army 2nd Rangers at Pointe du Hoc, June 6, 1944. How did the Rangers start evolving, and what are some of the similarities of Rangers in the 60s and 70s, 80s on down to the Rangers today?
Thank you, and thank you to the Reagan Library for having me out here. As a California resident, seeing a big group of God-fearing Americans get together in California is refreshing. So it's been a good 24 hours, but yeah. So referencing D-Day Rangers or D-Day soldiers as a whole, and to the men that are sitting right here, the standard was set in World War II, right? So on paper, Rangers go all the way back to the French and Indian War, but the heart of a Ranger was born on D-Day. And I think every generation to follow has always played this game of trying to live up to that expectation, trying to honor them in a certain kind of way. So when you go through selection, when you go through the process to become a Ranger, it's not just push-ups and long walks, right? It's a lot of knowledge as well. So they hammer that history into you, and not only the more recent history of Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, but also World War II, right? So D-Day and everything that happened that day. And just a quick statistic, right? Just to really highlight the significance of D-Day. That morning, 2,500 Americans died. The entire 20 years in Afghanistan, 2,400 Americans died. So just in one morning, we lost more Americans than the entire conflict I was a part of. So, when you go into conflict, when you go into war, when you go on a mission, especially nowadays, those statistics are ringing. And we're just doing our best to live up to those men and women, do our best, and continue that level of patriotism that was sparked, during World War II and after World War II. So I guess to kind of wrap that up, the heart of a Ranger was born, starting on D-Day, and then the events that soon there followed. But it hasn't changed. The Ranger mindset hasn't changed. The technology has changed. The weapons have changed. I was very fortunate to be born when I was born. I had probably $1 million worth of equipment on my body at any given time, where these guys had a canteen of water, a M1 Garand, and 4 or 5 clips of ammunition. So when they're told to storm the beaches, it wasn't if you're gonna make it out, there was a good chance you were dying, right? So it's the fact that you're able to run into that, knowing that death is probably gonna occur, right? If it's not you, it's statistically speaking, it's gonna be the 2 guys next to you. And still, when those ramps drop, they charged those cliffs, they scaled those cliffs. When one guy got shot, another replaced him. And I don't know if any of you guys have done any rock climbing or anything, but climbing while holding a rifle and fighting is not an easy thing. So the odds were stacked against them, and they still pushed through. And I think out of the 250 Rangers specifically that scaled those cliffs, I think about 90 made it out alive. So pretty big loss of life there for the special operations community. I guess a little bit different back then, but it was a massive loss of life. So our job is just to kind of continue and honor what those men did, and try and live up to what they were.
And the very term Rangers, we think it's been around, but it wasn't. It really became special ops in World War II, meaning the French and Indian War. There would be Rangers, but those were people protecting a community that would do a wide reconnaissance to make sure the community didn't get sacked. There were Confederate Rangers in the Civil War. And Texas Rangers, not only a baseball team named after them, that was Texas law enforcement. But they were skittish to create the Rangers because we weren't sure we wanted that kind of special ops. Like some of FDR's thinking, and George Marshall, was why do you take the creme de la creme, the best, and pull them and put them all in one group? Like, right. What do you think about that? I mean,
well, so the Rangers really started at World War II, Vietnam. The idea of the Rangers was send the top guys from their unit to training, right? Go to Ranger training, learn everything there, come back to the unit, and it's kind of a train-the-trainer situation, right? So they'd go to their unit, they would do their best to take the knowledge they learned and turn everybody else into Rangers, or at least, better fighters. Later on, SOCOM was developed, and their funding essentially was just different. So special operations as a whole was created. So we have Navy SEALs, AFSOC, MARSOC, Rangers, Green Berets, you name it. But when that was created, it really created this big divide between regular military and special operations. And at that moment, the regular military became more of a hammer, right? A supporting hammer, where special operations became more of a scalpel. So the mission really changed at that point. And we were treated like gold, right? You know, when I made it in, one of the first things they do is they take you to this big warehouse and they say, pick whatever you want, right? So it didn't matter what boots or guns or gear or whatever. I got whatever I wanted, and yeah, it's kind of like a you know, like a superficial moment, right? I was like, I don't deserve this. You know, like these guys were fighting with nothing. You know, what it means to be a Ranger is somebody that can go into a war with a canteen of water and a pistol, right? And take over a village or do whatever they need to do. So there's a very, very big difference between modern Rangers and Rangers back then. And obviously the word Ranger stems from ranging, right? So long walks, long movements. We took helicopters everywhere, right? We took Humvees everywhere. You know, like we did a lot of walking and training and stuff, and there was a few, you know, missions where our guys were walking pretty far, but we had the Golden Road, you know? So you look back at the history of a Ranger, it was a much, much different game back then.
You know, we should also thank the hero, Colonel Earl Rudder, who, and you know, Rudder in World War II, he had the task of telling the U.S. Army 2nd Rangers about 50% of you are, after all this vigorous training in Chattanooga and Fort Walton Beach and Fort Dix, New Jersey, and then going over to Great Britain and training in Wales, climbing up grapnels in secret, all of this going on, and Rudder, that April of 44, told them finally what their mission would be and said, half of you are going to be dead. It's going to be a suicide mission. And it's not, you will be treated like royalty if you quit. Please, you'll go back into the military, and this is not on your record. Nobody can put somebody onto a death mission. And I want to, you know, and none of, it's like a moment of the Alamo, you know, the line in the sand, all of them stayed. And Rudder then no officers were allowed to go, and Rudder insisted, and he actually broke military protocol and law. He could have been court-martialed for embedding with the Rangers and going there on Normandy himself, because he couldn't send those. He later went on to become the president of Texas A&M, and actually is the one who integrated women. It made it a co-gender, university, Rudder. And then Dwight D. Eisenhower, who at Ronald Reagan admired just so much, and when we think about what Ike had, that to have the letter, if it all went terrible, you know, he'd have to take all the blame, and then of course the letter if it went right. And the last thing with the weather problems, but I don't know if people realize, on the evening of June 5th, they all ate hot dogs, the U.S. Army 2nd Rangers, and they were going to leave at early morning. It was their dinner, beans, hot dogs, and they all got food poisoning from the hot dogs. So there was a lot of vomiting and illness going on, and then they had to get one of those Higgins boats, crammed like sardines with their guns and grenades and pack. And with the navigational blunder, they got off at the wrong spot. And as you said, they'd shoot the grapnel off the Higgins boats, but then you had to crawl straight up, all the way to the, the top, and just blood. But they took out the French, 155 millimeter blasting guns by taking thermite grenades and dismantling them, and we would have had many more dead if it wasn't for men like Lem Lamel and Jack Kuhn and others, almost all gone. And we're so blessed to have be here today with some D-Day veterans. I was going to go, Lisa. Let's switch gears and talk about Ronald Reagan, the father, and how moved he was by the writing you did and just a commitment of her daughter to a father. Did he ever mention anything to that, or have you just intuited it over the years?
No, when we walked in, we talked about all the helicopters. We were standing in a place, my family, and the lady who was our guide said, there's going to be 3 helicopters. The first one will be the president's aides. The second one will be the president's, the press. And then the next one will be the president and Mrs. Reagan. So we're watching all this, and they walk by, and I said to my mom, "Oh, look how close we are," because I thought that was it. But then they took us into the room, and he was there, and the first thing he did was grab my hand and say, I'm so proud of you. Your father would be so proud of you. And I needed to hear those words. And I always felt, and he wrote me several times. He wrote me again when he was going to visit Bitburg, the German cemetery. And he wanted to know how my father would feel about that and how I would feel about if he went to, and I said my father would go. They were teenagers as well, doing what they were told to do. So I really kind of had my dad and then kind of this father figure, and he was good.
And did you become a hero in your own family for pulling this off?
Well, I think to this day they're still shocked that I'm still shocked that it happened, and especially with the picture. I think it's in the program of the kiss. So it's like I have that. They sent me the White House sent me that picture, and we had it framed. And people would come in the house and go, "Is that you? Can you see the president?" So yeah, I've gotten a lot of people through history class, a lot of relatives, like I could just mention D-Day. I have information about D-Day, so yeah.
And after that experience, being there, did you start reading more about D-Day, learning more about Ronald Reagan?
I kind of read everything. I always read a lot of stuff about World War II. In fact, I'm doing it again and started to read. I reread your book and found out a lot more things that I had, realized I'd forgotten and skipped, so. And yet we just watched. I just always felt, still, like I said today, when I step onto these grounds, there's a comfort here that I feel. And I don't know, it's because we had kind of a bond. I mean, he said goodbye to me in his farewell address. I don't know. He was a good man, good dad.
It holds up, the speeches. Today, when you read them, not just the beauty of the language, or if you watch the beauty of Ronald Reagan's delivery, I think it's one of the classic presidential speeches, period, for what it says about America's commitment to democracy at home and abroad, and the feeling that we liberated half of Europe, but the other half might need to be liberated. And what do you think of the enduring value of Reagan's speech, or speeches, if you like, at Normandy?
When you work at the White House, and you don't realize at the time how historic some things are. Like, it could be a photo, and that photo appears decade after decade after decade. And Reagan's speeches that day, Pointe du Hoc and Omaha Beach, just are there, and they'll be there almost forever. It's just so impactful. What he said that day, how he moved the nation, how Europe was moved by it, how the media reported it, and those spoken words just continue. I mean, they're just indelible. The words are. They just are. And with regard to the speeches, that when he gave the first speech at Pointe du Hoc, when you work at the White House, and Fred Ryan knows this, Joanne Drake and Frank Lavin and Charlie Backley, you have the highs and the lows of working at the White House, and it's not all good. And when things were really going well, you're like, you got to come back down to a normal level, and then you got to pick yourself back up when things aren't so good. Reagan was always steady, as I like to say, was always amazing. Steady in the best of times, steady in the worst of times. He knew how to manage his emotions, and whether it was a successful endeavor, could have been legislation, it could have been some failure, whatever, he just moved on. Pointe du Hoc, Reagan was Reagan-esque, very strong. and the veterans are there. There were a lot of tears, and Reagan delivered that historic address, spent time with all of them afterwards, as did Nancy. But when he got to Omaha Beach, it was different. And that was because of Lisa. And I always remember Lisa was there in the front row, and as Reagan spoke, and the emotion she was showing impacted Reagan. And Reagan got through the speech, but he showed a lot of emotion toward the end, and choked up, and but spoke the words. And you never saw that with Reagan, but that day you impacted him like no other human being that I've ever known did or could. And of course, all the media were there. They did the cutaway shots of you. They showed Reagan. But beyond that, one of the things I remember most was Reagan and your dad, Brian Mulroney. They best of friends, great everything. Margaret Thatcher, Helmut Kohl, Yazoo Nakasone, but especially your dad and Margaret Thatcher. But then there was Francois Mitterrand of France. And that was a business relationship that they had. It was all business. That's the way it was. But what I remember also that day was Francois Mitterrand was there with Reagan when he spoke at Omaha Beach, as you well know, so many know. And Reagan made reference to President Mitterrand in the speech. But Mitterrand, at the end of the speech, he saw how the emotion that Reagan had shown, and Mitterrand went up and touched Reagan and touched him and actually kind of consoled him in a very nice, warm way. I thought, now I've seen everything. I just cannot believe that Francois Mitterrand went up to Ronald Reagan and did that, And so it was just incredible. And once again, Lisa, because of you.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you.
Well, it's
my dad.
The words. Ronald Reagan was an incredible reader and writer, and Governor Pete Wilson helped me once get to edit Ronald Reagan's diaries, and I was amazed at how he thought and put honesty down on paper, but wouldn't swear. If he was going to say a word anything, he'd put dashes, like controlling. Didn't want on writing, but hand did them all. Then we, with Professor Skinner, who's at Pepperdine, got to look at some of his letters Ronald Reagan wrote, which are remarkable. Then you look at the radio scripts, and you could be forgiven in the 80s to think Reagan's saying the Soviet Union's going to collapse and that democracy is going to beat communism and all, and a lot of people thought the Cold War would go on forever. How important do you think in memory the fact that here's 1984, as we heard from Peggy Noonan last night, this pulling together of your father and Thatcher and Pope John Paul II and Chancellor Kohl and the others, this great moment. But by 89, the Berlin Wall's down. And then Reagan had that other great speech about tear down the wall. And then by 91, the Soviet Union collapses. It's almost that Reagan in Europe seems to be going on a roll. Do you think, is it because he understood World War II so well? He had been in the Army Air Corps. He was a writer. He understood film and the visuals of it all. How was Reagan? He got so embraced, like you just said, with in Europe. Do you feel they were feeling his emotions and his commitment to NATO and the like?
I think so. I think that he really understood sacrifice for these veterans. Even though he hadn't fought, he did a lot for getting people to war bonds and all the films that he did. But I think he really understood what sacrifice was for these families. That he really, I think maybe he wanted to always be a soldier. I always got that feeling that he would have wanted to fight if he could. And because these people were, And it's just an honor, like my dad and the United States, it was an allied force. And I really believe that he saw them all as just heroes. And I think that Europe saw that. I think especially when we were in France, I really felt that especially in the Normandy area, that the American soldier, the Americans were just, they saved us. So I really feel he was able to articulate that and feel it. I think he showed it. I know, people say, oh, well, he was an actor, blah, blah, blah. But I really feel for myself that I saw it. The real deep commitment to democracy, to freedom, what it meant to be those young guys going over to a foreign country and fighting, to bring back the right to be who you wanted to be, the right to, to vote, whatever. I mean, to fight against a dictator. I think he really, in his heart, felt this extreme importance of democracy.
Nicely said. Thank you. And Cameron, how important do you feel? And I know everybody's an individual, so I don't want to make you spokesperson for the Rangers. But with that said, how important is a commander-in-chief for morale, who is serving as president, when you do all this training? And do you feel that you need to have the confidence of the president, or the president says that we do it, we're not interested in their personalities or policies, we just follow orders?
It's everything, right? So I got to serve under both Obama and Trump, very different experiences. It was there was a lot of support, and the one thing that I got from serving under Trump's administration was, it seemed like that administration was much more willing to ask us what we should do, right? Like, what is the answer to this? What do we need to do? What do the rules of engagement need to look like? And that something as simple as that makes us feel important, right? On top of that, there's always question of why we're doing this, why we're here. I'm sure from World War II to Vietnam, you name any conflict, the individual is going to ask themselves that on both a personal level and then a global level, right? So in Reagan's speech in '84, he has a great piece on liberation versus conquest, right? And that bit alone still rings through the military, right? Because we're over here, we're in this country, we're babies, like you referenced, right? I was 19 years old my first time in Afghanistan, and we don't know what we're doing, right? I learned how to do my laundry when I was in the military for the first time. So, we don't know what we're doing, but if we have a president that can help explain that to us, right? Like, no, you are liberating this country, and we saw that, right? You start working with the Afghan locals and really understanding why we need to be there beyond the greater picture. I mean, they are some of the most hospitable people in the world, and they were under Taliban rule forever. They're living in a prison within their own country. So getting to understand the difference between liberation and conquest is huge, right? And then having the support of an administration behind you, knowing that, hey, we're going out on a really deadly mission, whatever the case may be. We know we have air assets. We know we have QRF. We know we have people that are going to be there if things go wrong here. So I can't say we had that for the prior administration. I can say we had that for Trump's administration, which was a very securing feeling. When you know you have backup, you operate a little bit different. You sleep better at night, knowing that no matter what, you're taken care of. So it's very important. I think it's everything. And to that point, coming back to the States, having the support of the public is huge, right? Vietnam was a terrible example of that, and I think more recently, since our terrible pullout of Afghanistan in 2021, I've actually seen an increase in support. And people, always ask me, like, hey, maybe they're aged out of their ability to join or whatever the case may be, how can I help? How can I support? Are there foundations? What is out there for me to be a part of it? And the best answer I can give is just be a good American, right? And we go over and we do what we do, right? And everybody's got a different role in this world, but being a great American doesn't just mean flying that flag in your front yard. I'm a strong believer in, this country is ours, it's not the government, and it starts with the individuals, right? So if you want to make a great nation, it starts with a great family, right? So strong fathers, loving mothers, and building strong families that push those good morals and ethics onto their kids. Strong families build strong communities build strong cities to states to nations, right? So, if you guys leave with anything today, it's just be a good American, and that's how you serve your country. And I think if everybody were to do that, we'd be in a much different spot, and it's sad that we've drifted from that.
What did your, this is brilliant. How did you get the idea of being a good American from your parents? Did you have anybody in your family in the military? Teachers? How did your journey take you to the Rangers?
I was very fortunate to have a very strict grandfather that pretty much raised me, right? And I say strict, when you're a kid, it's strict, right? But as you get older, you realize why it's strict and why that discipline is instilled on you. And he served in the Korean War. He was in the Army. My uncle was also in the Army. He was Vietnam. He was a long-range reconnaissance guy. It's kind of what segued my career into the Rangers. But I was kind of always around it. I grew up on a very patriotic street, I should say, amongst a very blue city. So. All of the a few of the families on our street were military families.
What's the blue city?
Well, I mean San Diego. So
okay.
I should say California as a whole is a blue state, but San Diego is probably a little bit more red there, or just patriotic in general. So, I always grew up around it, and I would see, especially growing up through the early days of Afghanistan, Iraq, neighbors would leave and parades were thrown for them, and it was just. To a young kid, it's like those are the superheroes, right? I can't be Superman. You come to terms with the fact you can't be a real superhero, so that's the closest thing you can be. So, I'd say it was probably a collection of people. My grandpa, my uncle, and then just kind of the area I grew up in is what really pushed me into the military.
You were clapping like the whole audience was for your very eloquent. Recital of what it means to be an American, beautifully said. How did you feel emotionally dealing with, you're setting something up, a speech could go sideways, the weather, as you said, there's not, the satellite feed doesn't work for the show. Did you get a feeling when the sun broke and that things were just falling into place, or did you have a kind of anxiety throughout the process? And did you yourself, how did you encounter that extraordinary cemetery of crosses, Stars of David and crosses, and you go there, and how many in the audience have been to the cemetery at Normandy? That's a good amount. If your hand didn't go up, go. If you can. It's one of the most remarkable places to understand what you're talking about, the cost of freedom and what is liberation and the like. But tell us a little personal yourself about this.
Well, and picking up on the American Cemetery at Omaha Beach, when you see those 9,387 crosses, it's just an impeccable sight. And it's just breathtaking to see, and you just have to stand there and just in silence and think about where you are, what took place, what they did, and then to go back there like we did day after day, getting ready for the advance operation, but you never lost sight of where you were, what you were doing. But when we put that all together, as I said, we had a lot of support. It was a big advance team, a big operation, and you just knew going in how important it was going to be and how fitting it was for Ronald Reagan to be there that day, and you just kept telling yourself, don't mess this up, you know. And but I want to go back to your question to Lisa, and talking about democracy and democratic values and everything, and the perception of Reagan. Whether the people, countries, leaders in the U.S., anywhere in the world, were in accord with Reagan or not, I think they saw Reagan as a man with a big mind. When he gave those speeches in Normandy that day, that kind of secured his position, so to speak, as a true statesman. And then if you really knew Reagan, aside from that, so I think he had respect at that level. But there were a lot of people, too, in this country and beyond, and especially those that worked for him and really got to know him. You saw the decency of that man and how much he cared. And the ultimate point I want to make here is every decision Reagan ever made was always based on, I think, the human element. You know, it was never, as he always said, don't tell me the political upside, don't tell me the political downside. But he truly looked at the human element in any decisions he made, whether it was foreign policy, domestic policy, national security, and he cared that much. And he saw that side, and it was, and I'll use an example. Sanctions came up yesterday, and Reagan was against sanctions, and whether it was South Africa or otherwise, and his veto was overridden of the Anti-Apartheid Act. But he truly believed that those sanctions were going to hurt the people more than help. That the people at a certain echelon, whether it's the highest echelon or wherever, were going to benefit, but the real people, the people of the country, the people of that part of the world were the ones that were going to be impacted, and it was going to be painful, it was going to be setback, it was going to be harmful. And once again, it was because of the human element that he never lost sight of.
Cameron, the building on that, but you also are mentioning with President Trump, and you served for Obama. Do you think, though, Obama did something different with the military in the sense that we having our first black commander-in-chief, and that people of black Americans were saying in the military were feeling something special about that? Did you encounter that in any real way?
I didn't personally, and I think when you go through basic training or boot camp, you're all beat down together, right? So it creates this. I mean, you're all treated equally as bad, right? So it's there's not a race thing really in the military, and I know it's it's a big point. A lot of people want to talk about, but honest to God, one of my best friends, he was black, he was a Ranger, right? And it's like that when you go through that together, it doesn't really matter. So, in terms of the president being black and how that affected active duty service members, I didn't see it affected in any way. I think if anything, as a whole, operations just changed, right? And it just kind of pushed things into the shadow, right, for probably PR reasons or whatever. But operations didn't slow down. The enemy death toll did not slow down. The tactics to kill the enemy were a little bit different, right? A lot of drone strikes and stuff like that. But that was really the only change I saw.
Lisa, what do we all need to do more? Because I was mentioning taking our shuttle bus over here. I was hoping to do something with, to start doing some of my history teaching to people in the military more. But sometimes I feel like we don't do enough we say we love the troops, we say we do fund the military, but how do we, as citizens, get more emotionally involved with what's at stake? We're in a dangerous world right now, and people are putting their lives in harm's way. Are we too isolated from the realities of military life, or what's being asked of us as American people?
I think sometimes we take for granted our military, that they serve and they're over there and they're doing their thing, and we don't really think about what's behind it all and their families at home. I mean, my dad wasn't lifetime military. My dad just served his time and came home, but we always had respect. We always understood what they were fighting for. We're fighting for democracy. We are protecting, always should be protecting our country against dictatorships or any kind of, taking away of any kind of rights. So I really just think we need to read our history, World War II history, and all our war histories. But World War II incorporates so many countries. I'm reading a book now about Poland, in what the underground in Poland and Belgium and Norway, and what they did during the war. This was a true group effort, and I really think that we need to understand truly what we were fighting for. Not just, of course, against the evil access or whatever, but more about human rights and democracy and freedom, the freedom to be who you want. I mean, my dad was a first-generation American, and I can remember being 18, the vote changed, we could now vote at 18. My dad was there after school picking me up so that I could go register to vote. So you need all that. We just need to teach our children how important it is. And if, that saying says, if you forget your history, you have to learn from your history, or you are destined to repeat it. Yeah.
We only have a few minutes to go. That's a great answer, though. And you know who we also often underappreciate? Groups like the 40th Infantry Band and California National Guard. Thank you guys for being here for us. It's amazing what the music does to lift the spirit and frame our minds and souls, and so thank you. We're going to do one round, last questions. It's about America today. We'll start with you. What's your biggest concern about what's going on in U.S. foreign policy, military affairs? What's keeping you up at night that you think maybe it's a larger threat to our democracy than we realize?
Good question. I've always been an advocate for how you got something is how you keep it, right? So America's fallen into this retirement mindset, if you will, of work hard, stack money, and then chill out for 20 years, right? Or go do something, we're good, we don't have to worry about it anymore, and that freedom's there. So like in this instance, go out, establish our freedom, liberate Europe, do our thing, establish ourselves as the free world, the leading country, and then kick our feet up. So my fear is we're crippled by comfort right now, and we're in that phase. What the old saying I think is like, hard times creates hard times creates rough men, or rough men create easy times create soft men create hard times, right? Something like that. I probably butchered it, but we're kind of in that phase of soft men, right? We went through hard times, and we're kind of on that tail end where I hate to say it, but something is inevitably going to happen, right? It's just that's the circle of how things work. So it's tough, and as somebody that fought, I don't want to see anything happen. I want to come back and kick my feet up. So yeah, that's why I make it a driving point to be a good American, right? Because I think that's that's what we're lacking. You know, the media likes to focus on this very, very small percentage of bad Americans that are yapping at the college campuses and doing all that, when in actuality, this is America, right? So we need to be louder. And I think if we do that, right, we do a good job of being a little bit louder, not only does it show our allies that we are still strong, it shows our enemies that we're not, we're still not a country to mess with. So that's where I guess my heart is right now and what I'm seeing. Granted, I'm a young guy. I've only lived through, one, maybe two conflicts, but just studying the history books, that's a pretty big concern of mine right now.
Excellent. And would you ever consider going into politics yourself?
My wife might kill me.
I think you'd be great. You're a wonderful public servant.
I appreciate that.
Same question to you. What's concerning you?
I just say, please vote. Vote your heart. Get out and vote. Vote for democracy.
Do you feel that that's the gateway for future America? Even if you're doing a write-in on your ballot, or even if you're picking a third-party candidate, you'd rather see them vote than stay home?
I think, well, you should. Everybody should vote, and that's the beauty of our country. We have a democracy, so that we can our voices all can be heard. I feel personally democracy is in jeopardy, and so I feel you need to get out there and vote.
Okay. Very good.
I'm looking at the clock here, so I'm only going to take a minute.
All right, that's it then.
Two things. I'm going to answer that, but I want to go back to Omaha Beach real quick. That day, before Reagan spoke at Omaha Beach, historic photos, historic footage of the Reagans going into the cemetery, and Nancy placing the flowers on the grave. And after that, we had it scheduled for the President and Mrs. Reagan to go into the small chapel, which is in the back corner of the American Cemetery at Omaha Beach, just a tiny little chapel. They were going to go in there, say a prayer very briefly, and then go out and give the address. And the photo went well, as Charlie Backley knows, and the footage, it was all there. And when we went to go into the chapel, the door was locked. We had the director of the American Cemetery who'd been with us all those weeks and everything. And I said, "Can you unlock the door?" And he said, "I don't have the key." And I said, "What do you mean you don't have the key?" He said, "Well, I gave it to the Secret Service, the technical division of the Secret Service that goes in and does the security sweep. What they did was they secured it, they swept it like they did the cemetery. They locked it, kept the key, didn't give it back. There's the president standing there, Nancy standing there, and everybody's looking at it like, what are you gonna do?" And I said, "We're not going in, you know?" And so I said, "Why don't we just wait here a little bit and just let the time go by, just a few minutes and everything." And then the day the address went on and everything was perfection. But the next day, flying home, we're headed back to Washington, flying back commercially, was reading the International Herald Tribune, and that was it was owned by the Washington Post, the New York Times, and I think Whitney Communications, and had all the stories, had all the photos, and talked about everything, the day, the quotes from Reagan's speeches, and everything. And then it had that little bit in there about, and the Reagans, the President and Mrs. Reagan went into the chapel and prayed at Omaha Beach. And I put the paper down, I just said, "It sounds pretty good to me." Now, to answer your question,
We are out of time, but did you had to tell Mrs. Reagan she couldn't go in? I would not want to be in that position.
well, yeah. And I looked at Reagan like, hey, I went to the president, help me out here, like.
Did you think of kicking it with your, ramming it open?
Can we take the hinges off or something and open it the other way? Doug, I just want to say real quick, what bothers me is people complain about Congressman so-and-so, Congresswoman so-and-so, Senator such and such, the president, the former president, or whatever. It's not the office holders. It's not the Congress. It's not the representatives. It's not the senators. It's not the president. It's not the person running for president. It's the electorate. And it just drives me crazy. The electorate needs to get more informed before they go in and vote. And they're the ones that empower these people. It's not the people running for it, it's the electorate.
What an incredible panel we've had. Cameron and Lisa James, stellar. Thank you.